Hi, everyone. Hi. Welcome to Tableau Tips for Beginners. What if you could open up Tableau, connect to data, and start answering questions today? Well, we're hoping we can get you there. My name is Petra.
And I'm Rehan.
And I'm a software engineer at Tableau. And I've been at the company for about 4 years.
I am also a software engineer at Tableau, and I've also been at the company for 4 years. So we're basically the same person.
That's very true. Actually, we both love singing karaoke at company parties with our friends.
Making the same face.
And we also both wanted to be astronauts when we were kids. So today, we're going to explore some data that is space-themed.
Before we get started, though, I want to talk about your journey with Tableau. So we've noticed that people generally go through 4 stages of learning Tableau. And since this is a beginner talk, I'm going to assume that a lot of you are earlier in that journey. So let's take a look at what that journey looks like, some of the time at least. First, everything is magic. Tableau is doing stuff, and it's just like making visualizations, and it's going great. Eventually, though, you want to tweak something, and if you don't know how Tableau is set up or how it thinks about your data, that magic can get frustrating. So, of course, not to be blocked by a little bit of frustration, you dive into the documents, or you ask your coworkers for some help, and you start to understand a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes in Tableau. And then you can eventually find your way to the thing you want to build, either to find an insight or to build a visualization for other people to use. And if you keep working with Tableau, you can get to the point where your success is effortless. At this point, you can enter what's called flow state, where you can get super zoomed in on your data, get in the zone, and there's nothing stopping you from doing the analysis you want to do. Our goal with this talk is to help you hopscotch over stages 1 and 2 and find you somewhere in 3 and 4. It's a lot of stuff that we wish people had told us when we had started with Tableau.
So today, to help get you there, we're going to cover 7 important Tableau concepts. The first is Show Me, a tool that helps you get started when you don't even know what you want to see yet. Next is creating a viz. So you know what you want, and you take those fields in Tableau and drag them over to shelves. Then this important concept. Blue fields in Tableau segment your data, while green fields draw axes. That you can customize your marks with a tool called the Marks card. And that you can do quick data preparation with Tableau Desktop. Also, that insight requires iteration and a change of perspective, so we'll demo that today. And finally, we'll build a dashboard and tell you some ways of how you can share those insights that you've found with Tableau.
So let's jump in. Let's do a demo. First, let's start with Excel. I have a bunch of data here about NASA's selection process of picking astronauts. So every row is one astronaut, the year they were selected by NASA, and their number of space flights and spacewalks. This data, by the way, is current as of 2013. We also have the city, state, and country that they were born in. If we go to Tableau, we could use the Connect dialog to open the text file that we have open in Excel, or we can just drag and drop it straight into Tableau. Ooh, there we go. When you connect to data in Tableau, you'll be presented with the data source page. The data source page gives you a preview of your data that looks a little bit like Excel on the bottom half. So you can see the name, the year, and the space flights. You can also see that Tableau has a little icon above each one Tableau's made a guess about what kind of data is in each column. So you can see that name has a little ABC icon, and so it thinks that it's a string, while spaceflights has a number icon, showing that it thinks it's a number. The city, state, and country have a geographic data icon, and so it's correctly identified that these aren't just strings, these are this is geographic information. We can also do a little bit of editing here. For example, my Excel spreadsheet has this field marked as year, and I'm familiar with the data, so I know that that stands for their selection year. But if I want to make it a little bit easier, I can double-click the name and rename it selection year. Great. We can also edit the data in Excel and bring the new data in. For example, I know that James level is better known as Jim level. So I can edit the information in Excel, save it really fast, and hit the refresh button in Tableau. Now, watch James Level's name here while I click refresh. Tableau's updated the row. You can add rows and you can modify rows in in Excel. And as long as your connection is live, as you can see on the top here, you can click the refresh button over here, and Tableau will bring in the new data. The top half of this page is where you'll edit your connection. You can do things like joins and unions here, but we don't need to do any of that with this sheet, so we can move on. I'll open my first sheet by clicking on Sheet 1 on the bottom. This brings up the Workspace page, and this is where you'll spend most of your time in Tableau. Notice that our columns came in on the left side as fields, and the icons showing what kind of data they are also there. The pane is separated into dimensions and measures. Dimensions contain qualitative values, like names or geographic locations. These help you split and segment your data. Measures are quantitative values that can be measured. So these are things like the number of space flights. You'll also notice that there's a few fields here that didn't show up as columns in our data set. So we have like latitude and longitude here, one called number of records, and measure names and measure values. All of the ones in italics are ones that Tableau generated for us. Because we have a geographic location field, Tableau has generated latitude and longitude for us, so we can put things on a map. Tableau's also generated number of records, which represents the number of rows. Now, our data set has 1 astronaut per row. So to make this a little bit easier, we can rename this by opening the context menu and rename that to number of astronauts. Finally, there's measure names and measure values, which are special fields that we're not going to get into during this talk, but I encourage you to look into them. So let's just get started making a visualization. I'm interested first in the number of astronauts, and there's a lot of ways to bring data into your view on Tableau, but I'm just going to double-click and let Tableau place it wherever it thinks it should go. So we've made our first visualization. Notice that number of astronauts has moved to rows. Rows and columns are 2 shelves that you can place your fields on. Rows represents the y-axis, and columns represents the x-axis. So number of astronauts is on rows, and sure enough, number of astronauts is on our y-axis. There's also a mark in blue that represents our data. Anytime Tableau draws a visual representation of your data, we call that a mark. And we can put our mouse over it and find out more information via the tooltip. So Tableau is telling us that the number of astronauts is 357. I'm also interested in this data over time. So I want to bring in the year. I'm not exactly sure where to put it, so I'll just double-click it again. Tableau has placed it on the columns shelf. So it is our x-axis. And sure enough, selection year is on the x-axis, which is good. It kind of makes sense to put time on the x-axis, so I like that. Now we can see those 357 astronauts over time. And if we mouse over each mark, we can see the year and the number of astronauts selected in that year. You know what, though? I know this data, and I know that there were no astronauts chosen between 1969 and 1978. But we're using a line here, so it kind of makes it look like a bunch of astronauts were selected in 1975, but they weren't. So maybe a line isn't the best use, the line isn't the best mark type to use here. I still like that the rows and columns are set up the way they are. I just want to change the way that the marks are laid out. So I'm going to use the marks card to do that. The marks card changes the way that marks look on your visualization. I'll use this drop-down that says automatic and instead choose bar. Great. So now it's more clear that in 1969 there were 7 astronauts selected. 1978, there were 35, and in the intervening years, there were no astronauts selected. So earlier, you might remember that Petra mentioned that there are 2 types of fields, blue and green. Both of our fields right now are green. Green fields are continuous, while blue fields are discrete. Continuous fields contain an infinite range of values, like numbers on a number line, while blue fields are a finite set. You can change between the 2 types, and it'll change the way your visualization looks. So if I click selection year and change it to discrete, it'll turn blue, and it'll change the visualization. It did turn blue, and our visualization doesn't have those gaps anymore. Every year is just next to the one that comes after it in the data set instead of chronologically. So 1969 and 1978 are right next to each other now. And there's situations where you might want to switch this, but for this particular data set, I'm going to switch it back by clicking the undo icon, which is my favorite button on the whole application. So undo is on the top left, remember where it is, and it'll switch it back for us. I'm never afraid to do things in Tableau because I can always hit undo. So cool. This is looking pretty good, actually. I think I like where this is right now, so I'll give it a name by double-clicking on sheet 1 and giving it a name. Let's say astronauts by year. I'm ready to work on a new visualization, so I'll click the New Worksheet button on the bottom. So our last visualization was about the whole program, but now I want to know about individual astronauts. We can use the Show Me feature that Petra mentioned to do so. You can open it on the top right by clicking the words Show Me. Right now, none of the visualization types are lit up, but you can kind of see in a little bit of gray what they look like. As we select fields on the left, or have fields on our shelves like columns, rows, and marks, Tableau will take those fields and help us build different kinds of visualization. I'm interested in individual astronauts, so I'll click Name. And let's say space flights. I want to select both, so on the Mac, I'll use Command, and on Windows, you would use Control. So I'll Command-click space flights. I have both fields selected, and now Show Me is showing me all kinds of different visualizations we can make. The one that's recommended is highlighted in orange with an orange border. Let's go ahead and click that. All right, so we have a list of astronauts on our rows. Notice that name went to rows. And we have the number of spaceflight as the columns. So they're in alphabetical order right now, but I want to change it to be by the number of space flights. I'm interested in who did a lot of space flights. If I mouse over the bars, an icon appears showing me that I can sort it. So I'll go ahead and click that. Okay, so it looks like Jerry Ross and Franklin Diaz did the most space flights with 7 each. I'm also interested in the number of spacewalks, but I don't want to change my columns and rows. I like them the way they are. Well, remember, if you want the data to stay put, you just want to add some information to it, you can use the marks card. So I'll drag spacewalks onto color on the marks card. Ooh, I clicked it too long. There we go. Great. So instead of all of the marks being the same color, now they're all different colors. And the legend on the right shows us how to interpret that color. So as you can see, a lighter blue means that there are fewer spacewalks, and a darker blue means that there are more spacewalks. So Jerry Ross and Franklin Chang Diaz have the same number of spacewalks, but it looks like Jerry Ross has more with 9, while Franklin Chang Diaz has 3. And that makes it very clear by the color. All right, I like where this one is, so I'm going to stop making changes to it. But you know, I don't know a lot of these astronauts' names. There's like my favorite astronaut's Neil Armstrong, which is like a mainstream astronaut to have as your favorite, but whatever. And I want to find him on this visualization. So we could do that in one of two ways. We could use either a filter or a highlighter. This time, I'm going to use a highlighter. So if you open the context menu on Name and click Show Highlighter, a text box appears on the right. I can type Neil and get all of the people with the word Neil in their name to show up. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can find Neil Armstrong. So Neil Armstrong, let's see, what are your stats, Neil? Did 2 space flights and 1 spacewalk. So a spacewalk technically is any time you leave your vehicle while you're in space. And I can think of one time he did that. It was when he walked on the moon, and he was the first one to do it. So maybe it's not about racking up numbers, maybe it's just like about being first sometimes. So Neil is like buried in the data set, but he's my favorite. I'm done with this visualization as well. It's like in a place where I like it, so I'm going to give it a name. Let's call this Astronaut Experience. So let's build something else. There's one set of fields that we haven't touched yet, and that's their birthplace. Now we can drag and drop their country over to rows, and it'll give us the list of countries. And when we were looking through this data, I was actually quite surprised that so many other countries than the US are represented. I mean, these are astronauts selected by NASA, and they were born all over the world. Tableau brought these fields in as a hierarchy, so there's a little plus icon next to the name of the field. If we click that, we can see the state and the city. Notice that it matches the list on the left side, when you expand it. But you know, this isn't the best way to look at this data. We want to see it on a map, right? Like intuitively, I don't want to see it as a list. So I'll clear the worksheet with the Clear Worksheet button and just drag country onto the map, or not onto the map, onto the view, and it'll make a map. Great. Now I can see where all of the people are from. I'm also interested in how many people were born in each place. So I'll use number of astronauts for that. Let me drag it to color and see how that does. Okay, so darker colors are more astronauts. So clearly the US has a lot. Let's mouse over. 335. Canada's got 1. The UK has 5. Netherlands has 1. India with 1. And China with 2. There's a lot of variation among the values, but the US is such a huge value that it's washing everything else out. Let's try something else. Maybe size? Okay, so you can barely tell, but there are countries there. They're just really small. Let's try label. Let's just keep trying things. OK, so now all of the marks are the same size and the same color, and they're labeled. There's other ways to deal with this situation, but this one's straightforward, so let's go with it. Of course, every time you build a visualization, there's a million questions. You think you're done, and then there's a million questions. For example, who are the 5 people from the UK? Or who's the 1 person from Spain? There's someone from Argentina. What are their names? Well, one way you can find that out is to click on the mark and click the View Data icon. It'll show you a summary that's just relevant to the view that you're building, but if you click Full Data, you can see the whole row. And in this case, Fernando Caldiero is from Argentina and was an astronaut selected in 1996. But if I was going to hand this visualization to someone else, I wouldn't want to make them go through that process to see the data. So what I want is a list of astronauts and then a map, and then have that be my interface instead. And a dashboard is a great fit for that. So let's build a dashboard. I'll click the New Dashboard button on the bottom. Oh, you know what? I forgot to give that a name. Let's just call it Map. Easy. OK. All of my sheets are listed on the left side, including the map I just made. So I'll drag that over to the dashboard. I also have my list of astronauts, and I'll drag that on as well. Now, before I let it go, notice that it's showing me where it's going to place the dashboard as I move my mouse around. I do want it below, so I'll let it go right here. All right, so I have my list of countries and my list of astronauts, and I want it to be set up such that when I click on a country, it filters the list of astronauts for me. We can do that with a couple of clicks by selecting the sheet that you want to use as a filter and clicking Use as Filter. Now, when I click on the UK, we see that there's 5 astronauts, and we can see how many space flights and spacewalks they went on. Let's try a few others. Well, OK, so you know there's a problem arising. Notice that the axis here is limited to 3, and our legend is all dark blue when we select Canada. But when we select the US, it goes up to 8, and it has a full gradient of values. The legends and the axes, by default, are set to automatically reset to whatever data is being shown at the moment. That's not a good fit for our use case, so we can fix that. First, we'll do the axes. I'll double-click the axis, and instead of making the range automatic so it resets, I'll click Fixed. Next, I'll double-click on the legend. And I know this is a beginner class, but we're going to go into the advanced options. Stick with me. We're going to click Advanced. And we're going to set the start and the end to be fixed at 0 and 10, which Tableau has brought in as the full range of values. So it defaults to doing the right thing. Hit OK. And now, when we select the US, the axis stays the same. When we click Canada, the axis is still at 8, and our gradient is still the same. So I can compare the colors between countries as well and get my intuitive sense of how many spacewalks they went on across different countries. Well, all right. This is looking pretty good. One thing that I want to change really quick, though, is that the legend and the filter are on the top right, but they're associated with this set of data on the bottom. You can move it around, or if you hold down Shift, you can make it free-floating and just move it wherever you want. So I'll just give it a little resize and tuck it in the corner there. Perfect. OK, I'm feeling pretty good about this visualization. So I would want to share it. Now, one way to do it is if the person that you're sharing it with has a copy of Tableau, you could save a .twibix file and just email it to them. If your company has Tableau Online or Tableau Server, you can upload this visualization using the server dropdown. Yeah. So, yeah. And so if you're willing to share this information with the world, you can publish it to Tableau Public, which is an amazing place full of people making data visualizations of all kinds. So I highly recommend you check out Tableau Public as well.
Cool. Great demo. Thanks. Yeah. Now, before we move on to the next demo, I did want to talk about maps just for a minute, because I love maps. So I just want to pull back into view Rehan's demo. So how Tableau is able to build maps from something like a column of strings of country names is because there's this internal geo database that stores that information. So Tableau recognizes that, makes that field the data type, a geo field, and then you can use it on a map super easily. So we're going to start our next demo, and we're really, really interested in spacewalks in particular. I think this is what gets us really jazzed up about space.
Oh, jazz, because we're in New Orleans? Is that what you're saying?
This is a stupid joke. And another term for spacewalk is an extravehicular activity. So like Rehan mentioned before, it's like you're outside of a vehicle, but you're still in a spacesuit. So that's a neat term if you want to like throw that down sometime at conference. So we found this really cool data set that has a list of all of those EVAs for US astronauts and Russian cosmonauts. So we have this Excel file with 2 sheets. One sheet for the Russia data and one for the USA data. Now, let me just make Tableau big. Now I can connect to that from the left-hand side Connect pane on the Start page by clicking Microsoft Excel and then selecting that Excel file. Now we're brought to the data source page, but there aren't any of the columns that we saw in Excel there. And that's because we have multiple sheets, so we have to drag them over to the view. And you can do that by clicking on each of your sheets. I'm just shift clicking, and then dragging them over to the canvas. Now automatically, Tableau unioned these 2 sheets because we had the same columns in each sheet. So let's rename this to be more clear about what data we're including to Russia and USA, and then hit enter. So you may have noticed that there are these 2 columns on the right-hand side, sheet and table name. Now this is unique to when you connect to an Excel file. And for us and our data, these columns are identical because we only have 1 table per sheet. So we can just hide one of them by getting our context menu and selecting hide. Then in the other one, I can rename it by double-clicking and hitting enter. So in this view, I want to do a little bit of cleanup of my data, just to make sure it's ready for building a visualization. If you have more extensive cleanup, you can use our other product called Tableau Prep. It's super new, and we're very excited about it. But in Tableau Desktop, we have these. We have some choices available to you to do some cleanup. So as I'm looking at my data, I'm noticing I have a start date, some string talking about purpose, crew name, and then I notice person hours, and it has a date it has dates in the year 1899, which is a little off, because I know there wasn't anyone walking around in space in 1899. So let's change, so Tableau's interpreted as a date-time data type. So we can click that and instead change it into a string. So now I see that it's hours : minutes. So if I want to calculate that into a total number with one unit, like just minutes, for instance, I can split this column and simply open that context menu and select Split. Now Tableau generated 2 more columns using the colon as the delimiter to split on, because Tableau is just smart enough to know that a colon can often be used as a delimiter. So we can hide that original column and then rename these 2 generated columns to person hours part and then person minutes part. All right, so looks good. Let's go to our sheet. So the first thing I'd like to do is to do that calculation on the amount of time that a person has been out on a spacewalk. So you can do that by right-clicking in the data pane and select Create Calculated Field. Now this is our calculation dialog. On the right-hand side, you'll see a bunch of different options for functions. And you can search this. Like for instance, if you want a sum function, and then when you select it, there'll be a description and also an example of how you use it. So let's build that calculation for total person minutes. And we can just drag that person hours part, multiply it by 60 to get it into minutes, and then type in person minutes. Now in the bottom of the dialog, you'll see that red text that says this calculation has errors. If you click on it, it'll give you an idea of what might be wrong with your calculation. So it looks like I'm just missing the plus. So now my calculation is valid. And if I select OK, a new field will appear in the measure section of the data pane. So there's our total person minutes. Let's drag that out to the view and drop it on the rows shelf. So I want to see what total person minutes of someone doing a spacewalk has looked like over time. So let's use our start date field as well and drag that over to columns. Okay, so we see a similar view to one that showed up in Rehan's demo. And we have these years at the bottom that may not be consecutive, but they're the years that we have data for. So for instance, 1969 is next to 1971. So for date types in Tableau, you can use a date as a date part, which we have right now, where we've got individual years as our part of the date that we're focusing on. Or you can use a date value, which provides the context of within what a date schema looks like, where your data lands. So we can do that by opening up our active fields context menu for start date and choosing that second section, year. So that was subtle. So I'm going to use Rehan's favorite button and undo just to show you that again. So notice how the data spreads out as if it's landing on a timeline now instead of individual year buckets. So I also know that from that view, there are some years where nobody did a spacewalk. And this line is a little bit misleading. So let's change it to a step line to make those actual marks more clear. So from the marks card, if we click this path button, you have a few options. And let's choose step. So now this is a bit more accurate. I'm not sure that it's really showing me what I want. Step lines are kind of hard to understand, especially if there's a lot of variation. And especially if we want to segment this data a little bit more. Like, for instance, adding country to detail. So let's take country and put it on color. So now we have one line for the data from our Russia data set and one for the USA. Now this is kind of hard to see. And I want to be able to understand this a little bit better and more clearly. So the best way to do this might be doing a running total so that I can see the change over time. And I'm not getting this line that is changing a lot. So you can do this with quick table calculations, which are simply a click from your context menu. So in the quick table calculation section, we have a bunch of different options. But let's choose running total. So now we have an interesting story. It almost looks like, from this data, that Russia and the US are racing to try to get the most amount of time in space. And then all of a sudden, the US takes the lead. Now, I also want to add a little bit more detail to this, since we've got these sort of big steps for years, and I know we have more granularity in our data. So let's smooth that out really fast by going back to our context menu and then selecting day level of detail. So that's a bit smoother now. Now let's dig into where these lines intersect. And you can do this using the View toolbar by just right-clicking on your view and selecting Show View Toolbar from the menu. From there, you can select your magnifier and then click on the area you want to zoom in on. So I'm going to get my grabber back by going to the square selection. And look at that. Right there, April 22nd, 1998, Russia had beat the US in terms of amount of time that Russian cosmonauts had been doing spacewalks. Now, if you might remember from history, the International Space Station opened in 1998. So we know that the space station had a lot of contributors, a lot of different countries giving money. And I think since the US took off so quickly after this, it looks like maybe the US gave a little bit more money to be able to spend more time at the space station. Now, I think this is really interesting, and so I want to add that information to the view. Now I can do this by going to the Analytics pane on the left-hand side, grabbing a constant line, and just dragging it over to the Start Date option. Now I can type in November 20th, 1998, and a line shows up. So you might notice at the bottom of the line, there's text to indicate the year that I've chosen, but I want to have the event as the text. So I can format this by clicking the line, selecting Edit, and then changing the label to a custom label. And hit OK. Now I can also format this line by clicking it, and then from my tooltip, clicking Format. Now I can change the font, make it real big, and then change the alignment as well to making the text at the top. Now if I close that, we're still zoomed in this view. So let's zoom back out again by using that little toolbar in the view and resetting our axes. Nice. I'm pretty happy with this story. So I'm going to title my sheet Total Minutes Spacewalking. Okay.
Cool. I can't believe there was that little bit of time where the total number of hours that Russians had spent spacewalking was higher than the US, and then we just took off.
I know, it was less than a year. It's crazy.
We just took off like a rocket.
Stop it.
So, I know that we threw a lot of information at you, but what we're hoping is that you'll take away the vocabulary and the general safety of messing around with Tableau, especially with the undo button, and that you'll just remember oh, that feature exists and we can look it up. So the exact steps that we took are not as important as just remembering that the features exist. So with that in mind, what we covered today and what we showed you at the top of the talk is that Show Me is the easiest way to start exploring data. If you remember, we selected some fields on the left, and we clicked horizontal bars, and it just made us a visualization. Next, you can create a viz, or visualization, we call it a viz, by placing fields on shelves. Examples of shelves are columns, rows, and the marks card. Blue fields segment, while green fields draw axes. Remember that blue means discrete, and green means continuous. And that will change the way that the data is displayed depending on which one you choose. Remember that you can customize the marks with the marks card, and that won't change your rows and your columns. So if you like your XY axes, you can change the way that the marks are drawn with the marks card. You can prepare your data either by changing the name of a field or changing the way the data is interpreted by Tableau. For example, Tableau was bringing in a field as a date from 1899, and we changed it to a string. Petra also did a calculation using that field to make the total number of minutes from the hours and the minutes. So you can do all of that from Tableau Desktop. Remember that sometimes insight requires iteration and a change of perspective. For example, Petra realized at some point, oh, running total is the thing I want. As you learn more about Tableau, those features will become tools in your toolkit, and they'll come up at the right time to help you figure out what you need to figure out. And earlier, I built a dashboard, which makes it easy for people to explore my data using filters and maps and lists. It's great. So we also want to leave you with some resources. Petra will take you through that.
So here at Tableau Conference, we have a few things for you. Tableau Doctor is this super awesome resource where you can make an appointment, and if you have any questions about how you're building your view, you can take it to them, and they will help get you through it. There is also drop-in, so if you don't manage to get an appointment, I think there's about 2,000 of them available, but if you don't manage to get an appointment, there is drop-in available as well.
It's very popular, so 2,000 might not be enough. So try to get an appointment as early as you can if you need one, and if you don't manage to get one, definitely do a drop-in.
Mm-hmm. There's also hands-on trainings. So this Calling All Tableau Newbies is actually happening 5 times during conference, and we highly recommend it. So then when you go home, there's a lot of online resources as well. If you go to our website, in the support section, you'll find support for Tableau Desktop, which is the tool that we use today. And you can query for anything you like, such as calculations, like we covered today. In addition to this, there is the Tableau Help, which is built by our amazing content team. And in there, they actually have live tutorials and recorded tutorials, and additional documentation of the product. So then, most importantly, though, are community forums. So the Tableau community has really helped us make our product what it is today. The amazing creativity that our customers do with our products is just beyond anything we could have imagined. So highly, highly recommend the community forums. And also, please rate our session. We really, really do read all of the feedback and make changes so that we can deliver the best content for you. Thanks so much.